but also the heads of the Conference of Presidents of major American Jewish organizations, an umbrella group that itself spans the full ideological gamut of the U.S. Jewish community and endeavors to find consensus when possible on key issues, among them, with, of course, backing for Israel, one of those. Now, with us today in studio is William Daroff, the CEO of the Conference of Presidents of major American Jewish organizations. William, thanks for joining us. I'm going to just mention the late Colin Powell for a second, because it's interesting. He is one of those figures, served in Republican administrations, had good relations with the Jewish community, staunch supporter of Israel. Eventually, he said he didn't shift, but did come to support Barack Obama with a fluidity that maybe you don't see so much in the United States, which has become more politically divisive and rigid. And that is something that has to be overcome, certainly when it comes to Israel.
Absolutely. Secretary Powell is a real example of a post-partisan from a different era who was able to move between Republicans and Democrats, who was able to move between military and government and civilians, and all along had strong support for Israel, strong connection to the Jewish people. I don't know if it's politically correct to say so, but he was a Shabbos Goy.
No, we just said it.
Did you say it? Okay,
yes.
All right. So if you can say it on I24, then it must be politically correct. He was a Shabbos Goy as a teenager, going into his college years. His Yiddish was far better than mine. I don't know how your Yiddish is, Calev. But somebody who, when you talk to him, and I had a great deal of interaction with him during the administration of George W. Bush, you could tell in his kishkas that he really understood the role that Israel plays in securing democracy and freedom, and as a key ally here in the region.
Well, let's talk about that discussion with Foreign Minister LAPID and his hope, which he said and we have seen some, I won't say fracturing, we're not there yet, but certainly at the margins or more toward the edges, some disturbing signs about what we could call bipartisan support for Israel. I would say more support for Israel across the ideological spectrum.
I think there's certainly issues on the fringes, and there are certainly issues right and left. We have the issue with Senator Rand Paul, who's holding up the Iron Dome funding. We have the issue with the Squad, who also tried to hold up the Iron Dome funding. But at the end of the day, if you look at that House vote that occurred, there were only 9 members of Congress who voted no, 420 some who voted yes. And I think at the foundational level, that is where American support is for Israel. I think when you push into nuances and you get into political gamesmanship, you see all sorts of issues. But at the end of the day, I think America is in the right place. Congress is in the right place. We do, though, as Foreign Minister LAPID focused on when he was in Washington last week, need to focus again on this idea that support for Israel must be bipartisan. It must go beyond Republican and Democrat partisan battle lines and not be caught up in the partisan food fight that, unfortunately, everything in Washington is caught up in these days.
Right. Now, I want to move on to another issue that he raised is, of course, the Abraham Accords and his commitment to the government and some continuity with the previous government, strengthening those accords with the existing partners and maybe expanding them beyond. And we do know that the American Jewish community, both in certain individuals, several that have been interviewed on the show, and also some Jewish organizations have played a role in developing those relations, especially those countries that Israel doesn't have formal ties with. So what can the American Jewish community continue to play that role and push on beyond where the Abraham Accords are now?
Absolutely. I think, as you point out, a number of American Jewish organizations were front and center in building those bridges early. The Conference of Presidents' first trip to the Gulf region was 20 years ago, and we continue. We were in Saudi Arabia just before COVID, just before the first set of accords were announced, and we continue to push those relationships, and we can have conversations sort of second line that governments can't have one-to-one for all sorts of political reasons. And so those conversations continue. I'm very pleased with Secretary Blinken's affirmation of the administration's support for the Abraham Accords, which we saw last week with the tripartite meeting, and in fact that we're seeing tonight with another meeting that's occurring between the foreign minister of UAE and LAPID and India. Having this focus by the United States and by the government here, I think will pay great dividends in ensuring that this normalization of Israel continues to occur, that people see and governments see the great benefits that can flow from having a normal relationship with the State of Israel on technology level, on medicine, on innovation, and trade, and on other ways that Israel can help the world, and that those other countries can help Israel.
Right. You're being very diplomatic and not mentioning other countries. I'm just going to say the conference, for example, Saudi Arabia, and there's been engagement there, and perhaps we'll see if that's one of the areas that's going to bear fruit. Now, I want to mention an issue that maybe is not, where the conference is not maybe directly involved in, but certainly its constituent members are, and the issues that involved are, and that is now the, if you could call, a race to be the chairperson of the Jewish Agency for Israel, the official body sort of mediating between Israel and the diaspora. And that race has now been thrown wide open. A lot of debate whether it should be an immigrant to Israel, a woman, what kind of person it should be. I'm just, your view is leading the Conference of Presidents.
First, I'm not sure we could call it a race at this point. It's more like a crawl.
A crawl, yes, because it's now been delayed at least another month.
Exactly.
And we expected an answer maybe today, I should say.
So I'm not on the committee that decides. Right. I don't have a vote. I will say that there are a number of excellent candidates whose names have been mentioned, and I understand there are a number of candidates who, with this additional month that's been allowed, who are in the offing to thinking about it. The Jewish Agency is an incredibly important agency for the diaspora, for our relations with Israel, for the government of Israel's relations with diaspora, and particularly on issues like Aliyah. And as we see more and more anti-Semitism across the world, we see more and more folks looking to make Aliyah, and having that connection, having the Jewish Agency top-notch, front of focus, and having them be able to influence the government to ensure that governmental policy is one that incentivizes folks making Aliyah is incredibly important. So I hope they make the right decision, and I'm looking forward to seeing it.
I think we all are. William Daroff of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, thank you for joining us on The Rundown.
Thank you, Calev.
And moving